a luxurious mansion, a 6-year-old boy with Down syndrome lived under the care of his millionaire father's new girlfriend. To the outside world, she appeared to be the perfect partner, patient, loving, and devoted. But behind closed doors, when she thought she was alone with the child, a cruel and despicable side emerged from the shadows. The maid's daughter, a brave 7-year-old girl, secretly witnessed the daily psychological mistreatment her new special friend endured in silence. One afternoon in the garden, when the cruelty reached its unbearable peak, the little heroine could no longer stay quiet and bravely confronted the grown woman, shouting with all her strength, "Don't talk to my friend like that." What she didn't know was that the millionaire father had arrived home earlier and was hiding, witnessing every terrible word. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the immense windows of the living room, turning dust motes into dancing diamonds in the air. The Persian rug, as soft as a cotton field, was the perfect stage for Richard's greatest joy, his son, Leo. At 6 years old, Leo was a little son, a boy whose Down syndrome seemed only to have amplified his capacity to love and to find wonder in every corner of the world. His fine blonde hair shone as he stacked colorful blocks, concentrated, the tip of his tongue peeking out from the corner of his mouth, an adorable habit that always made his father's heart melt. Richard, a man who had built a fortune from scratch, masterfully navigating the volatility of the stock market and turning bold investments into a multi-million-dollar net worth, knew that none of his achievements compared to the purity of his son's laughter. This house, a monument to his financial success with its vast rooms and works of art, only became a home when it echoed with the sound of Leo's little footsteps. He looked at the boy, a tender smile forming on his lips, and felt a wave of gratitude. Finally, life seemed complete, and a large part of that feeling was because of her. Veronica entered the room, moving with the grace of a ballerina. She carried a tray with a glass of juice and star-shaped cookies. Her eyes met Richard's, and she offered him a smile that seemed to promise a future of peace and happiness. "Look what I brought for our little champion," she said, her voice like smooth velvet. Leo looked up, his almond-shaped eyes shining at the sight of the cookies. "Star!" he exclaimed, his speech still developing but full of enthusiasm. "Yes, my angel. Stars for my favorite star," Veronica replied, kneeling beside him with a patience that Richard so admired. He watched the scene, feeling his chest swell with relief. Ever since Leo's mother had left them years ago, unable to handle the demands of a child with special needs, Richard had lived with a constant fear of not being enough. His business, an empire of assets and stocks, demanded his attention, but Leo was his most precious treasure. Veronica, with her calm demeanor and apparent affection, seemed to be the answer to all his prayers. She not only loved him, but seemed to adore Leo, treating him with a sweetness that warmed Richard's soul. "Thank you," he whispered to her as she stood up. She just winked at him, a complicit gesture of love. But across the room, near the door leading to the kitchen, someone else was watching. Elena, the housekeeper who had worked in the house since Leo was a baby, felt a familiar chill run down her spine. She saw the smile on her employer's face, saw Veronica's flawless performance, but she also saw what no one else seemed to notice. As soon as Richard turned to take a business call, Veronica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Her fingers, which had been tenderly stroking Leo's hair, now arranged the cookies on the plate with a cold, impatient precision. Leo, who was about to reach for another cookie, hesitated. His little hand stopped in mid-air. He looked up at Veronica's face, and the light in his eyes dimmed a little, like a bulb whose power is beginning to fail. Elena saw the subtle shift, the small shadow that crossed the boy's face. It was an instant, so quick anyone could dismiss it as imagination. But Elena saw it happen often. It was an almost imperceptible change, a withdrawal, a shrinking of Leo's vibrant soul whenever he was left alone with the woman his father believed to be an angel. And in her mother's heart, a seed of worry, small but persistent, began to sprout, threatening the peace of that gleaming house. The days that followed were a tense dance of appearances. Elena cleaned the vast rooms of the mansion with renewed attention, but her eyes rarely focused on the dust or the shine of the marble. Her internal radar was tuned to Leo and Veronica, picking up the tiny dissonances in the perfect melody they presented to the world. She noticed how Leo's hand, which always sought touch, now recoiled before getting close to Veronica. She saw how the boy's laughter, once a waterfall of joy, now seemed to have a floodgate, contained and hesitant when his father's fiancée was near. For Richard, immersed in calls about new investments and the cash flow of his international businesses, domestic life had never seemed so serene. He saw Veronica reading stories to Leo, helping him with puzzles, and his heart filled with a peace that money couldn't buy. He felt like a lucky man, a multi-millionaire who had finally found a balance between his capital and his personal life. One afternoon, while Richard was locked in his office finalizing a stock deal that could yield millions in profit, Eleanor was polishing silverware in the adjacent dining room. The office door was ajar, and Richard's focused voice could be heard discussing interest rates and dividends. On the living room rug, Leo was playing with his wooden train when he accidentally spilled a drop of grape juice. It was a tiny drop, almost invisible on the dark color of the rug. But Veronica, who was reading a magazine on the sofa, saw it. Her body stiffened. She stood up and in 2 steps was beside the boy. Without raising her voice, she leaned in and hissed, the words as sharp as shards of glass. "Can't you do anything right? Always making a mess, such a burden." Leo shrank, his small shoulders curling inward as if to protect himself from the weight of those words. His eyes filled with tears, but he made no sound. He just stared at the train in his hand, as if the toy were his only ally. From the dining room, Elena felt her blood run cold. She had heard every syllable, the cold, calculated cruelty, spoken in a tone low enough not to reach the office, hit her like a punch. In that instant, the fear of losing her job, the worry about rent and her own daughter Anna's future evaporated, replaced by a protective fury. She had to speak up. That night, after Leo was asleep, Elena found Richard in the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water. Her heart was pounding. "Mr. Richard," she began, her voice trembling, "with all due respect, I'm worried about Leo. He doesn't seem like the same happy boy he used to be." Richard turned, a crease of fatigue on his forehead. "And what do you mean, Elena? He seems fine to me. It's just, I've noticed he gets very quiet, almost scared, when Miss Veronica is around and you're not," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. Richard sighed, a sound of exhaustion. He glanced through the doorway and saw Veronica's silhouette in the living room, tidying Leo's toys. "Elena, I understand your dedication to Leo, and I'm grateful for it. But Veronica is the best thing that's happened to us. She has the patience of a saint. Leo is a sensitive child. Maybe he's just adjusting. Let's not create problems where there aren't any." The dismissal was gentle but final. Eleanor felt as if she had walked into a glass wall. He didn't want to see. Defeated, she turned to leave, but as she passed the hallway, her eyes met Veronica's. The woman was standing there, watching her from the dimness of the living room, and on her face, for a brief moment, was a smile. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of cold, calculated triumph. And in that moment, Elena knew she had not only failed to warn Richard, but had just declared herself the enemy of a woman who would not hesitate to destroy her to protect her secret. Veronica's triumphant smile haunted Elena for days. The mansion, once a place of dignified work, became a silent battlefield. Every gesture Veronica made in Richard's presence was a masterpiece of affection. Every glance she threw at Elena when he wasn't looking was a frigid warning. The war was subtle, fought in the unseen spaces, in the unspoken words. Elena felt trapped, her worry for Leo growing like a weed in her chest. She tried to create small havens of normalcy for the boy, a knowing wink as she dusted the furniture, an extra piece of chocolate cake left discreetly on the kitchen counter, a whispered, "You're my champion," as she passed him in the hall. Leo responded to these small acts of kindness with a fleeting spark in his eyes, a glimpse of the radiant boy he used to be. But Veronica's shadow was ever present, and the spark would quickly die out like a candle in a draught. The tension peaked on a Wednesday morning. Richard came down for breakfast with an electric energy, the kind of excitement he only showed when a big deal was about to close. "Good morning, my family," he announced, kissing the top of Leo's head and giving Veronica a peck on the lips. "I have fantastic news. That merger in Zurich, the one I've been working on for months, it's been approved. I have to fly out tomorrow. It'll only be 3 days, but this will solidify our wealth for generations to come." Elena's heart stopped for an instant and then began to pound against her ribs. 3 days, 72 hours. Leo, alone, under the exclusive care of that woman. Panic rose in her throat, cold and bitter. She glanced at the boy, who seemed not to understand the news, focused on drowning his cereal in milk. "Oh, darling, that's wonderful," Veronica said, her face lit with convincing pride. "Don't you worry about a thing here. Leo and I are going to have so much fun, aren't we, sweetie?" She stroked Leo's cheek, but her eyes, over the top of his head, met Eleanor's. There was a challenge in them, a clear message that with Richard gone, there would be no more need for disguises. It was in that moment that a desperate but clear idea formed in Elena's mind. She needed eyes and ears inside the house, an ally Veronica couldn't intimidate so easily. "Mr. Richard," she interjected, forcing her voice to sound calm and professional. "That's wonderful news about your business. Coincidentally, my daughter Anna's school goes on break tomorrow. With you traveling, I thought you might need me to stay later to make sure everything runs smoothly. If it's not too much trouble, could I bring her with me? She's 7, very quiet, and loves to play. She could keep Leo company." Richard looked at her, his face breaking into a smile. "Elena, what a great idea. Leo would love to have a friend to play with. Of course, you can bring her. Veronica, isn't that perfect?" Veronica was caught off guard. To refuse would make her seem petty and unreasonable. She forced a smile, though it was a little tighter than usual. "Of course, dear. That will be lovely." The next day, the farewell was fraught with a tension palpable only to Elena. Leo clung to his father's leg, a silent sob shaking his small body. Richard hugged him tight, promising to bring back the best Swiss chocolate in the world. "Be a good boy for Veronica," he said, completely oblivious to the terror in his son's eyes. Then he was gone. The sound of the luxury car's engine fading down the street was followed by the heavy click of the front door closing. The silence that fell was deep, oppressive. Veronica stood with her back to them for a long moment. When she finally turned, the loving smile was completely gone, replaced by a mask of cold indifference. Her gaze swept past Leo, who was still trembling, and landed on Elena. It was a look that said, without words, that the game had changed. The house was now her kingdom. Anna was a small whirlwind of curiosity and contained energy. At 7, she possessed a keen perception, inherited from her mother, and a sense of justice as clear and direct as a sunbeam. When she arrived at the mansion, hand in hand with Eleanor, her big, dark eyes took in everything: the soaring ceilings, the crystal chandelier that looked like a frozen waterfall, the floor so shiny it reflected her own astonished face. But it wasn't the signs of great wealth that impressed her most, but the silent boy watching her from behind the sofa. Leo peeked out, half hidden, his body tense. Anna, sensing his shyness, didn't approach. Instead, she sat on the floor and took her most prized possession from her backpack, a small stuffed fox with one button eye missing. She began talking to the toy in a low voice, creating an imaginary adventure about an enchanted forest. Slowly, Leo's curiosity won out over his fear. He came out from his hiding place and sat at a safe distance, listening intently. Anna looked up and smiled. "Wanna play?" she asked simply. Leo nodded, an almost imperceptible movement. That was the beginning of a friendship that bloomed instantly, as pure and uncomplicated as only children can be. They didn't need many words. They played with blocks, built a fort with cushions, and Leo's laughter, which Elena hadn't heard in weeks, once again echoed through the living room, free and genuine. Veronica watched them from a distance, an unreadable expression on her face. She kept away, busy with her phone, online shopping and planning what she would do with the generous budget Richard had left. To her, Anna's presence was a minor irritation, a small hiccup in her days of freedom. As long as the children didn't bother her, she was content to ignore them. On the second day of Richard's trip, while Elena was cleaning upstairs, Anna and Leo were playing in the boys' room. It was a fantastic space, with walls painted like a starry sky and a bookshelf full of every toy imaginable, a testament to his father's love and net worth. Leo showed Anna his favorite toy, an astronaut figure that lit up and made sounds. Suddenly, the door swung open and Veronica entered. "What is all this racket?" she said, her voice sharp. "I'm trying to deal with a problem with my investment portfolio, and I can't concentrate." Anna flinched, but Leo, in the middle of a happy game, didn't notice the change in tone. He held the astronaut out to Veronica, smiling. "Space," he said proudly. Veronica glanced at the toy with disdain. "Don't bother me with that nonsense. Put it away. And be quiet." Her hand moved to grab the figure, but Leo pulled it back with a protective instinct. The movement surprised Veronica, who stumbled slightly on the rug. She didn't fall, but her face twisted into a mask of fury. "You stupid boy! Look what you did!" she yelled, her voice now loud and cruel. Leo froze, the smile vanishing as if it had never been. Tears welled in his eyes, but he remained silent, clutching the astronaut to his chest. Anna, huddled near the bookshelf, watched the scene, her heart pounding like a drum. She had never seen a grown-up talk to someone like that. The woman who seemed so sweet and gentle was, in fact, terrifying. Veronica, realizing she had lost her temper, took a deep breath, composing herself. She shot a withering look at the two children. "I don't want to hear another peep out of you. Understand?" She left the room, slamming the door behind her. The silence she left behind was heavy, filled with fear and confusion. Anna looked at Leo. He was motionless, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. He made no sound, as if he knew that crying would only make things worse. In that moment, something shifted inside Anna. Fear gave way to a fierce indignation. This was wrong, very wrong. She moved closer to Leo and, with a hesitant gesture, touched his arm. "Don't cry," she whispered. "She's mean." And as she comforted her new friend, a steely determination formed in her small heart. She didn't know how, but she was not going to let that woman keep hurting Leo. The incident in Leo's room marked a turning point for Anna. The injustice she had witnessed lit a flame of courage inside her. She was no longer just a guest in the house. She had become her friend's secret guardian. Her childish but surprisingly shrewd mind began to work, searching for a way to show the adults what was happening. She knew that a child's words against those of a respected adult, especially one who seemed so perfect, would carry no weight. She needed something more. She needed proof. The opportunity arose the next day, unexpectedly. Richard, always generous with his son, had bought Leo a state-of-the-art tablet, hoping the educational apps would help with his development. However, Leo preferred his tactile toys, the wooden train and the astronaut figure, and the tablet was usually left forgotten in a corner of the playroom, its battery almost always charged. Anna, who loved technology, remembered the device. One afternoon, while Veronica was absorbed in a long video call in her office, discussing something about cryptocurrency with a consultant, Anna retrieved the tablet. With the ease of someone born in the digital age, she found the camera function and figured out how to record videos. It was perfect. The plan was simple. She would leave the tablet discreetly positioned somewhere with the camera recording, whenever she felt Veronica might be cruel to Leo. The first hurdle was finding the ideal hiding place. The living room was too open. The kitchen had too much traffic. Finally, she found the perfect spot in the playroom, a high shelf behind a giant teddy bear. The camera's small lens could peek out between the bear's arm and body, capturing a clear view of the area where she and Leo usually played. The strategy required patience and careful timing. On the first day, she didn't manage to record anything incriminating. Veronica barely interacted with them, treating them with a cold indifference that, while hurtful, wasn't explicitly cruel. But Anna's determination didn't waver. She knew it was a matter of time. On the last day of Richard's trip, the tension in the house was palpable. Veronica seemed irritable, perhaps anxious about her fiancé's return and the need to resume her role as the loving stepmother. That afternoon, Leo was trying to assemble a puzzle on the playroom floor. He was having trouble fitting a piece, and a small sound of frustration escaped his lips. Anna, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, scrambled to the shelf, started the tablet's recording, and sat back down next to Leo, pretending to be absorbed in a coloring book. Veronica walked into the room, her phone pressed to her ear. "No, I already told you. Sell the shares if they drop another point," she said, her voice tense. She ended the call with an annoyed sigh, and her gaze fell on Leo. "You can't even do a simple puzzle," she scoffed, walking over. "Sometimes I wonder if you understand anything. Your father spends a fortune on you, with therapies and expensive toys, and for what? So you can still be this slow." The words were like sharp stones, thrown with cruel precision. Leo flinched, abandoning the puzzle piece. He lowered his head, his blonde hair falling over his eyes, hiding his pain. Anna felt her stomach churn, but she remained motionless, her heart pounding wildly. She glanced at the teddy bear on the shelf. The small recording light was off. The tablet went into standby to save battery, but the camera was on. It had to have caught that. Veronica, unaware she was being watched by a digital lens, knelt in front of Leo. "Look at me when I talk to you," she ordered, her voice low and threatening. "When your father gets home, you are going to tell him that we had a wonderful time, that I was amazing. If you say anything else, if you try to tell any of your little secrets, I will make sure all of your toys disappear. Forever. Do you understand?" Leo nodded, a single tear rolling down his face and landing on the puzzle piece. He understood the threat, not the exact words, but the tone, the coldness, the danger. And Anna, from her silent observation post, understood too. She now had the weapon she needed, hidden behind the glass eyes of a teddy bear. Richard's return was like the sun arriving after a storm. As soon as he walked through the door, the gloomy atmosphere of the house dissipated, replaced by a warm, vibrant energy. He brought with him the smell of the outside world, of airports and fresh air, and a smile that promised safety. Leo ran into his arms, clinging to him with a desperate strength that Richard interpreted as longing. "Hey, champ, did you miss me?" He laughed, lifting his son into the air. "Daddy missed you so much." Elena and Anna watched from the kitchen doorway. Anna held her mother's hand tightly, the secret of the recorded video weighing on her small chest. Veronica, meanwhile, transformed instantly. The cold, impatient woman vanished, giving way to the loving, radiant fiancé. She hugged Richard, kissed Leo, and began to recount with enthusiasm the wonderful days they had spent together. "They got along so well," she said. looking at Anna with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your daughter is a lovely girl, Elena. She was wonderful company for Leo." Elena just nodded, the compliment sounding false and hollow. She knew it was part of a carefully rehearsed performance. In the days that followed, life in the mansion returned to its superficial normalcy. Richard, pleased with his business success and believing in the harmony of his home, dove back into work. He spent hours in his office, analyzing the gold market and planning new investments to further increase his vast net worth. Anna's presence at the house became a regular thing, as Richard, seeing how fond Leo had become of her, insisted that Elena bring her whenever possible. For Anna, every day was a mission. She felt like a spy in enemy territory. The tablet, with its precious proof, was safe in her backpack, waiting for the right moment. But how could she deliver the proof? How could she make an adult believe her? The first obstacle came in a way Anna hadn't expected. Leo, traumatized by Veronica's threats, became even more withdrawn. One evening at dinner, Richard asked him about the trip. "So, son, did Veronica take good care of you? Did you guys have fun?" Leo looked at his plate, then at Veronica, who shot him a quick, sharp glare, and finally at his father. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, he began to shake his head back and forth, a distressed sound coming from deep in his throat. Veronica intervened quickly, the concern in her voice a work of art. "Oh, honey, I think he's tired. It was an eventful few days, and you know how he gets when his routine changes." Richard accepted the explanation, but a small seed of doubt was planted. He noticed the fear in his son's eyes, even if he didn't understand its source. The second obstacle was more direct. Veronica, sensing the silent complicity between Anna and Leo, began to see the girl not as mere company, but as a threat. She started to intensify her surveillance. If the two children whispered in a corner, she would suddenly appear. If Anna looked at her for too long, she would confront her with a, "What is it? Did you lose something?" The pressure was mounting. Anna felt the weight of the secret and the fear of what Veronica might do if she found out. She knew she had to act, but fear paralyzed her. What if no one believed her? What if, by trying to help Leo, she ended up getting her mother fired, the only source of income they had? The mansion, with all its wealth and beauty, had become a gilded cage. Eleanor, Anna, and Leo were trapped in a web of lies woven by Veronica, and Richard, the master of it all, was the blindest of them all. Time was running out. Anna could feel it. Veronica was becoming bolder, her snide remarks to Leo more frequent, even with Anna's subtle presence. It was as if she were testing the limits, confident in her ability to manipulate everyone. Anna looked at her friend's sad face and knew she couldn't wait any longer. She had to find a way to show Richard the truth, before Leo's spirit was broken for good. The turning point came on a sunny Saturday afternoon, in a way so mundane that its importance would only be understood later. Richard had decided to take a break from analyzing the profitability of his investment funds to spend some quality time with his family. He proposed a picnic in the vast backyard, an oasis of perfectly manicured grass, rose bushes, and an old magnolia tree that offered generous shade. Veronica organized everything with her characteristic efficiency, preparing a basket with gourmet sandwiches, fresh fruit, and natural juices. Anna and Leo were thrilled with the idea. For them, it was a chance to play outdoors, away from the watchful eyes inside the house. Elena watched from a kitchen window, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. The scene was idyllic. Richard spread a large plaid blanket under the magnolia, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. He played airplane with Leo, whose laughter echoed through the garden. Veronica smiled, taking pictures with her phone, documenting the happiness for her social media. Anna, feeling more relaxed, joined the fun, chasing Leo in a game of tag. It was during this chase that the unexpected happened. Anna, in her excitement, didn't see a small dip in the lawn. Her foot caught, and she fell, putting her hands out to break her fall. In her path was the low table where Veronica had carefully placed the drinks and a crystal vase with flowers from the garden. The impact was unavoidable. The table tipped, and the vase, an expensive piece of Italian design that Richard had given Veronica, shattered on the stone patio. The sound of the breaking crystal was sharp and shocking, silencing the laughter. For an instant, everyone froze. Anna, with a scraped knee and wide, terrified eyes, looked at the glittering shards. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with threatening tears. Richard rushed to her, concern etched on his face. "Are you hurt, sweetie? Don't worry about the vase. It was an accident." But Veronica didn't move. She stood, staring at the wreckage of her gift. Her face, once a portrait of serenity, was now as hard as marble. The mask had slipped. The fury in her eyes was so intense it seemed to burn. She turned to Anna, and the words that came out of her mouth were not addressed to a 7-year-old who had made a mistake, but to an enemy. "You clumsy, useless girl!" she hissed, her voice low but vibrating with rage. "Look what you did! Do you have any idea how much that cost? But what can you expect from a housekeeper's daughter?" The venom in those words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Richard, who was helping Anna up, stopped, stunned. He looked from Veronica to Eleanor, who had come out of the kitchen at the sound of the crash and was now frozen in the doorway, her face pale. Leo, who was standing next to his father, started to cry, not for the broken vase, but for the cruelty he recognized so well. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Richard looked at the woman he loved, the woman he trusted with his son's well-being, and for the first time he saw a glimpse of the person hiding beneath the charming facade. The ugliness of that moment was undeniable. Veronica, realizing what she had done, tried to backtrack. "Richard, honey, I didn't mean..." It was the shock, the sentimental value of the vase, she began, her voice suddenly soft and pleading. But it was too late. The crack in the perfect image had appeared, and through that crack, Richard began to see the other little things he had ignored. The fear in Leo's eyes, the worry on Elena's face, the tense silence that sometimes hung over the house. The picnic was over, the perfect afternoon was in ruins, and in that garden, under the shade of the old magnolia, the seed of doubt that Eleanor had planted weeks before finally began to sprout in Richard's mind, strong and impossible to ignore. He looked at his fiancée and, for the first time, wondered who she really was. The incident with the broken vase wasn't the end, but the beginning of a slow, painful disintegration of Richard's trust. In the days that followed, the house seemed shrouded in a fog of tension. Veronica tried her best to repair the damage, redoubling her displays of affection for Leo and treating Anna with an artificial sweetness that was almost more disturbing than her anger. She apologized to Richard repeatedly, attributing her outburst to stress and her sentimental attachment to the gift. "I love your son more than anything. You know that?" she would say, her eyes filled with rehearsed tears. "That girl, she just got on my nerves for a moment. That's all." Richard wanted to believe her. The idea that he had been deceived, that he had put his son in a vulnerable situation, was so devastating that his mind resisted it. It was easier to accept the excuse of a moment of weakness than to confront the possibility of calculated cruelty. However, he could no longer ignore the signs. He began to watch, no longer the passive observer who only saw what was presented to him, but an alert father searching for clues. He noticed how Leo flinched subtly when Veronica approached from behind. He saw his son's hesitation in accepting a caress from her, an almost imperceptible movement of recoil before forcing himself to accept the hug. They were minuscule details, but now, with his eyes open, they screamed at him. The relationship between Anna and Leo also deepened. The incident in the garden solidified their bond. Anna, who had been the target of Veronica's fury, now understood on a much deeper level what her friend had been suffering. She became his protective shadow. When she sensed Veronica was about to say something harsh to Leo, she would create a distraction, pulling him into a game or asking a loud, innocent question. Leo, in turn, found a safe harbor in Anna. Her presence was a silent promise that he was not alone. Their friendship was a balm for the invisible wounds Veronica inflicted. They developed their own language, a mix of simple words, gestures and glances that only they understood. For them, the vast mansion, with its assets and possessions, was just the backdrop for their alliance, a world apart where they could simply be children. Eleanor watched this friendship blossom with a mixture of pride and pain. She felt immensely proud of her daughter's courage and empathy, but her heart broke at the necessity of that protection. She felt powerless, a spectator in a drama she couldn't stop. The conversation she'd had with Richard weighed on her mind. He had dismissed her, and now she feared that any new attempt would be seen as revenge for Veronica's insult to Anna. Her dilemma was torturous: protect her job and her daughter's future, or risk everything for the safety of a boy she loved like a son. Meanwhile, Veronica felt the ground beneath her feet begin to give way. She noticed the change in Richard, the questioning looks, the subtle distance. Panic began to set in. She had worked hard to build this life, to insert herself into this world of wealth and power. The thought of losing it all because of two insignificant children was intolerable. Her strategy shifted. She could no longer rely on her charm alone. She needed to isolate her adversaries. She began planting little seeds of doubt about Anna in Richard's mind. "Honey, I don't want to be a nag, but Anna seems a bit wild, don't you think? She broke the vase, and today I saw her trying to climb the library bookshelf. I'm afraid she'll hurt herself or break something else." They were subtle lies, half-truths designed to paint Anna as a problem child, a negative influence. She was building a narrative where any accusation from Anna would be seen as the invention of a jealous and disobedient girl. The Cold War in the mansion intensified, and Leo and Anna were right in the center of it. Two small, brave souls caught in a very dangerous adult game. Veronica's tactic of undermining Anna's credibility began to have a subtle but corrosive effect. Richard, already confused and desperately wanting to restore peace in his home, became susceptible to the manipulation. He loved Anna's presence and saw the joy she brought Leo, but Veronica's constant insinuations began to shape his perception. One day, a small scratch appeared on the lacquered door of an antique cabinet. Veronica immediately showed it to Richard. "I don't want to accuse anyone, darling," she said, her voice full of false reluctance, "but the children were playing with toy cars in that area earlier." Richard sighed, the frustration evident on his face. He didn't scold Anna directly, but his tone with her became more cautious, his interactions tinged with a mistrust that the girl felt deeply. Anna found herself in an impossible position. She was being painted as the villain, the problem child, while the true source of malice in the house continued to wear her mask of perfection. The injustice was suffocating. She looked at the tablet hidden in her backpack every night, the video evidence burning like a hot coal. But how could she use it now? If she showed the video, Veronica would easily accuse her of manipulation, of being a vengeful girl for being disciplined. The wall Veronica had built was almost insurmountable. The situation reached a critical point on a rainy afternoon. The children were confined indoors, and the pent-up energy made the air heavy. Veronica, irritated by the bad weather and the constant presence of the children, was particularly hostile. She criticized Leo for everything: the way he held his colored pencils, the noise he made pushing his blocks, the way he hummed softly to himself. Each word was a small cut, invisible, but deep. Anna watched, her stomach in knots. She could no longer stay silent. Gathering all the courage she possessed, she decided it was time to act, even if it meant facing the storm. She waited for an opportunity. A moment when Veronica's cruelty was so blatant it couldn't be denied. It happened in the library. Leo was sitting on the floor, looking at a large picture book of animals. He turned the pages carefully, fascinated by the colorful images of giraffes and elephants. Veronica walked in, speaking on her phone. "Yes, treasury bonds are safe, but the yield is low. We need to think about something with higher growth potential," she was saying. She ended the call and her gaze fell on Leo. "What are you doing with that book?" she demanded, her voice harsh. "The pages are all wrinkled. You ruin everything you touch." She walked over and snatched the book from his hands with a sharp tug. Leo let out a small whimper of surprise and sadness, his eyes fixed on the book he loved so much, now in her hands. That was the moment. Anna, who was in a corner of the room, felt a wave of righteous fury surge through her. The fear dissolved, replaced by a fierce clarity. She stood up and walked toward Veronica, her small body trembling with indignation. She stopped in front of the woman, looked directly into her eyes, and with a clear, firm voice that didn't seem to belong to a 7-year-old, said the words that would change everything. "Don't talk to my friend like that," she declared. "You're mean." The silence that followed was absolute. Veronica stared at the girl, initial shock quickly turning to an icy rage. Leo looked at Anna, his eyes wide with astonishment and admiration. In that instant, Anna was not just his friend, she was his hero, his shield. Veronica crouched down, getting to Anna's eye level. Her face was a mask of restrained threat. "You have no idea who you're messing with, little girl," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "If you keep making up these stories, I will make sure your mother never works in this house again, or any other. You'll end up on the street. Is that what you want?" The threat was brutal and direct, designed to crush a child's spirit. But Anna didn't back down. She held Veronica's gaze, her heart pounding, but her determination unwavering. She had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. The battle for the soul of the house had finally been declared openly. Veronica's threat hung in the library air, cold and heavy as a shroud. Anna felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't look away. The image of her mother, tired but always smiling, flashed through her mind. The fear of causing her harm was real, a tight knot in her throat. Yet the frightened face of Leo, who was looking at her as if she were the only thing keeping him from falling apart, gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. She remained silent, her small stature radiating a defiance that enraged Veronica even more. The woman stood up, her superior height restored. "I warned you," she said, her voice frigid. And with that, she turned and left, leaving the two children in a silence heavy with dread and uncertainty. From that confrontation on, the dynamic in the house changed drastically. Veronica began a relentless campaign to discredit Anna. She was no longer content with small insinuations. She created situations to frame the girl. An ink stain mysteriously appeared on a white linen sofa near where Anna had been drawing. The diamond collar of Veronica's pet teacup poodle disappeared, only to be found later in the pocket of Anna's coat hanging in the entryway. Each incident was presented to Richard with a performance of sorrow and disappointment. "I just don't know what to do, honey. I try to be patient, but she seems determined to cause trouble." Richard's internal conflict deepened. On one side was the woman he planned to marry, a respectable and seemingly devoted figure. On the other, a 7-year-old girl. Adult logic leaned one way, but his heart, the part of him that saw the genuine friendship between Anna and Leo, resisted. He began to question Anna, his voice a mixture of paternal authority and confusion. "Anna, did you take Bijou's collar? It's very important that you tell me the truth." Anna would deny it, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. "I didn't do it. I would never," she'd insist. But her denial sounded like the excuses of a child caught in a lie. She was losing the battle. Adults were starting to question her credibility. Even some of the other household staff, influenced by Veronica's narrative, looked at her with suspicion. The fourth obstacle was the most painful: isolation. She felt the stares, heard the whispers. The brave girl who had confronted a cruel adult was now seen as a little liar. The only person who never doubted her was Leo. He didn't understand the complex accusations, but he understood his friend's sadness. When he saw Anna crying quietly in a corner, he would walk over and hold her hand, a gesture of unwavering solidarity. His faith in her was the only thing that kept her from giving up. Elena was in agony. She saw what Veronica was doing, the calculated cruelty of destroying a child's reputation. Each new accusation was a stab to her mother's heart. She wanted to march into Richard's office, to scream the truth, but Veronica's threat was a sword hanging over her head. Losing this job would mean disaster. She felt like a coward, trapped between maternal love and the need for survival. The tension in the house became unbearable. Anna felt increasingly cornered, and Leo, sensing his friend's distress, became even more anxious and withdrawn. The joy their friendship had brought to the mansion was being systematically crushed. One night, Anna couldn't sleep. She sat at the window of her small bedroom, looking at the illuminated mansion across the street. It looked like a fairy tale castle, but she knew there was a dragon inside its walls. The tears she had held back for so long finally came, silent and hot. She felt small, powerless, and utterly alone. Veronica's threat wasn't just about losing a job. It was about destroying her voice, erasing her truth. And, for one terrifying moment in the dark night, Anna began to wonder if the dragon, after all, was going to win. The next morning dawned grey and damp, mirroring the mood that had settled over the house. Richard had left early for an important meeting, something about restructuring his international assets. Veronica, feeling victorious and in control, seemed more relaxed than she had been in days. She hummed as she made her coffee, treating Elena with a condescending politeness that was almost more insulting than her open hostility. To Anna, the house felt like a trap about to spring shut. The weight of the injustice was so physical she could barely swallow her breakfast. She looked at Leo, who ate his cereal in silence, his head bowed. The light in his eyes seemed to have dimmed even further, and Anna felt a wave of desperation. She couldn't give up, not for him. That day, a small team of landscapers was working in the backyard, pruning the rose bushes and trimming the hedges. The noise of shears and leaf blowers created a sound barrier, isolating the garden from the rest of the world. Veronica, wanting the children out of her way, suggested they go play outside. "The fresh air will do you good," she said, her tone falsely maternal. Anna felt a shiver of foreboding, but she had no choice but to obey. The garden, usually a place of joy, felt strangely threatening. The landscapers were focused on their work at one end, leaving Anna and Leo alone near the stone patio under the magnolia. Veronica watched them from the living room window, phone in hand. The situation reached its breaking point suddenly and brutally. Leo was trying to stack some smooth stones he found near a flower bed. His less nimble hands knocked the little tower over several times. A sound of frustration escaped him, a low grunt. It was the trigger Veronica seemed to have been waiting for. She strode out onto the patio, her face a mask of irritation. "Can't you even do that quietly?" she said, her voice sharp and filled with contempt. "It's amazing how annoying you can be without even trying. Sometimes I think you do it on purpose, just to drive me crazy. No one is ever going to want you around if you keep acting like a whiny, helpless baby." Every word was a blow. Leo flinched, dropping the stones. He wrapped his arms around his chest, a small, fragile barrier against the torrent of cruelty. His lips trembled, but he fought not to cry, remembering the threats that crying would only make things worse. It was more than Anna could bear. The promise she had made to herself, the protective love she felt for her friend, all of it exploded inside her into an incandescent courage. She forgot Veronica's threat, forgot the fear of her mother losing her job, forgot her own powerlessness, She saw only Leo's pain. She marched up to Veronica, planted her feet firmly on the grass, and, with her voice ringing with an authority that went far beyond her 7 years, yelled the words she had been holding back for so long. "Stop it! Leave him alone! You are the meanest person I have ever met!" At that exact moment, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway went unnoticed, muffled by the noise of the gardening equipment. Richard, having finished his meeting earlier than expected, had decided to come home for lunch with his son. He came in through the side door that opened onto the garden, wanting to surprise them. And that's how he saw it, not a scene filtered through excuses or manipulations, but the raw, shocking truth. He saw his fiancée, the woman he believed to be an angel of patience, standing over his son, her face twisted in an expression of contempt. He heard her cruel words echoing in the air, and then he saw the brave little daughter of his housekeeper, Anna, placing herself between the abuser and the victim, a small lioness defending her cub. Richard's world stopped. The noise of the leaf blowers, the bird song, the very beat of his own heart, it all seemed to go silent. He stood in the shadow of the doorway, an unseen witness to the moment that would tear away the veil of lies and reveal the devastating truth he had refused to see. Time seemed to stretch and twist in that suspended moment in the garden. For Veronica, Anna's shout was the final affront. She spun toward the girl, her eyes blazing with rage. "You!" she spat, her control finally shattering. "I warned you. You and your mother will be out of here by tonight." For Anna, the world was reduced to Veronica's furious eyes and the sound of Leo's silent sobs behind her. She braced herself for what was next, her body tense but her resolve firm. And for Richard, standing in the doorway, the scene unfolded with horrifying, undeniable clarity. Every piece of the puzzle his mind had been struggling to assemble clicked into place with a painful thud. Leo's fear, Eleanor's worry, the accusations against Anna. It all made sense now. It was a tapestry of deceit, woven with cruel skill, and he had been blind to it all. He took a step out of the shadows. The sound of his shoe on the gravel was quiet, but in the tense silence, it boomed like thunder. Veronica turned, and the look on her face shifted from shock to denial and, finally, to panic. The mask of cruelty dissolved, revealing the frightened, calculating woman beneath. "Richard, honey, it's not what it looks like," she stammered, her voice suddenly weak. This girl, she was being insolent, and Leo, he was having a tantrum. But the lies died on her lips. Richard's face was a stone mask, his normally warm and kind eyes like chips of ice. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on his son, who was now looking at him, the tears finally flowing freely, a mixture of relief and fear. Richard walked slowly across the patio, each step heavy with the weight of his failure. He knelt in front of Leo, completely ignoring Veronica's presence. He opened his arms, and Leo launched himself into them, sobbing convulsively, releasing weeks of pent-up pain and fear. "Daddy, Daddy," was all he could manage. Richard held him tight, his heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. He buried his face in his son's hair, inhaling his scent, and whispered, "I'm here, son. Daddy's here, and I am so, so sorry. I am so sorry." He stayed there, rocking his son, until the sobs began to subside. Then, and only then, did he look up. His eyes passed over Veronica, who seemed to have shrunk, and landed on Anna. The girl was standing there, fists still clenched, her face pale, but her eyes steady. He looked at this 7-year-old child who had shown more courage and perception than he, a powerful billionaire, ever had. In that moment, the magnitude of her bravery struck him. She had risked everything, her safety, her mother's livelihood, to protect his son. "Anna," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "you—" He couldn't find the words. What can you say to a guardian angel disguised as a little girl? Elena, who had come to call the children inside, appeared at the kitchen door and stopped, her hand flying to her mouth as she took in the scene. Richard looked at her, and in his eyes was a silent apology, an acknowledgement of his own blindness. The tension in the garden was unbearable. It was the moment of truth, the climax of a silent drama that had unfolded under his roof for months. All the evidence was there, the testimony of his own eyes, the state of his son, the courage of a little girl, and the crumbling lies of a woman. His fortune, his deals, his net worth in dollars and euros, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the small world that had been broken and his responsibility to fix it. He stood up, still holding Leo's hand, and finally turned to face Veronica. The calm in his voice was more terrifying than any shout. "It's over, Veronica. Get your things. I want you out of my house within the hour." Richard's words fell on the garden with the finality of a sentence. Veronica tried to argue, her tears now genuine, born not of remorse, but of the desperation of watching her future of luxury and security crumble. "Richard, please, give me a chance to explain. It was a misunderstanding, a terrible moment," she pleaded. But Richard held up a hand, a gesture that silenced her instantly. "There is nothing to explain. I saw. And more importantly, I finally understand everything I refused to see before." He turned to Elena, who was still frozen in the doorway. "Elena, please help Anna and Leo inside. And then, if it's not too much to ask, please supervise Ms. Veronica's departure." The formality in his tone was the final blow. To Veronica, he was already a stranger. Veronica's removal from the house was swift and quiet. She walked upstairs, defeated, while Elena followed at a respectful but firm distance. 2 suitcases were packed. 20 minutes later, a cab was called. As Veronica came down, she avoided everyone's gaze. The glamorous, confident woman had vanished, leaving behind a diminished figure whose greed and cruelty had led to her own ruin. The front door closed behind her, and a deep, cleansing silence fell over the mansion. It was Richard's first victory, the immediate protection of his son. But it came with a bitter taste. As Leo sat beside him on the sofa, finally feeling safe enough to fall asleep, Richard was haunted by the recognition of his own negligence. His business success, the relentless pursuit of growing his capital, had distracted him from his most fundamental responsibility. He had trusted blindly, ignored the signs, and his son had paid the price. The guilt was a physical weight pressing on his chest. That night, after Leo was tucked into bed, Richard called Elena and Anna into his office. The room, normally a center of power and high-stakes deals, became a space for confession and gratitude. "Elena," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't have the words to apologize. You tried to warn me, and I didn't listen. I failed my son, and I failed you." Eleanor, with her quiet dignity, just nodded. "You were in love, Mr. Richard. It's easy not to see what we don't want to find." Then he turned to Anna, who was sitting in a large leather chair, her feet barely touching the floor. He knelt in front of her, just as he had with Leo in the garden. "Anna, what you did today was the bravest thing I've ever seen. You defended your friend when no one else would. You were his guardian." Anna's eyes filled with tears, this time of relief. Richard continued, "I know about the vase, and the collar, and the other things, and I want you to show me that tablet you keep in your backpack." Anna's eyes widened in surprise. She ran to get her backpack and, with trembling hands, showed him the video. Richard watched the recording, the scene in the playroom, heard Veronica's cruel words, the veiled threat. The final evidence of months of psychological abuse was there, captured by the intelligence and bravery of a little girl. That video was the final catharsis. Richard's second victory began there, rebuilding his son's trust. In the following days, he cancelled all his meetings. He turned off his phone. His businesses, his fortune could wait. He devoted himself entirely to Leo. They built blanket forts, read every picture book in the library, had picnics in the garden, and, most importantly, they talked. Richard learned to listen, not just with his ears, but with his heart, understanding the emotions Leo expressed through simple words and gestures. He was relearning how to be a father, present and attentive. The transformation was visible in Leo. Slowly, the shadow in his eyes receded, and the sun of his radiant personality began to shine again. His laughter once more filled the hallways, this time without fear or hesitation. The mansion, which had been the stage for so much silent suffering, began to heal. 3 weeks after the confrontation in the garden, the mansion was an unrecognizable place, not in its appearance, but in its soul. The wealth that once manifested in art and designer furniture was now reflected in the quality of the laughter that echoed through the rooms. The true fortune of the house, Richard finally understood, was not in vaults or investment accounts, but in the happiness and safety of its inhabitants. His final victory was not just about Leo's healing, but about completely redefining his priorities and creating a new family structure built on respect and compassion. One of the first and most important changes he implemented was a heartfelt conversation with Elena. He called her to his office, not as a boss to an employee, but as a man seeking to right a wrong and honor merit. "Elena," he said, "I've spent weeks thinking about how to thank you and Anna. No bonus, no check, could ever repay the integrity and courage you've both shown." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I would like to offer you the position of head housekeeper and Leo's primary caregiver, not as an employee, but as a partner in raising him. I want you and Anna to move into the guest wing. I want this house to be your home too." Elena's eyes filled with tears. It was an offer that went beyond any expectation, a proposal that recognized not just her work, but her value as a human being. She accepted, not just for the financial security, but for the promise of an environment where her daughter and Leo could grow up together, protected and loved. The friendship between Anna and Leo flourished. Free from the shadows of fear, they were inseparable, a dynamic duo who filled the house with life. Anna, with her innate courage, encouraged Leo to try new things, while Leo, with his unconditional sweetness and affection, taught everyone around him about the purity of love. Anna became a permanent, beloved presence, no longer the housekeeper's daughter, but Leo's sister at heart, his protector and his biggest fan. Richard was profoundly transformed. The ruthless multi-millionaire who saw the world through spreadsheets of profits and losses learned that life's greatest dividend was time spent with those you love. He reorganized his professional life, delegating more, traveling less, and setting firm boundaries for his work hours. Afternoons were now sacred, dedicated to Leo and Anna, whether assembling puzzles on the living room floor or simply listening to their stories about the day. He discovered that the true return on investment wasn't on the stock market, but in the light in his son's eyes. The boy with Down syndrome, who had suffered in a silence that nearly broke his spirit, found his voice. He not only overcame the trauma, but thrived in an environment of total acceptance. He learned that his difference was not a weakness, but a part of who he was, and that he was worthy of all the love and respect in the world. His confidence, once shattered, was rebuilt on the solid foundation of his father's unconditional love and Anna's fierce friendship. The story ends on a golden afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after that fateful day. In the garden, under the old magnolia tree, 2 children laughed as they chased soap bubbles that Richard was blowing. Elena watched them from the patio, a serene smile on her face. The mansion, which had witnessed months of disguised cruelty, had become a sanctuary. 2 families, brought together not by blood but by circumstance and choice, learned that the true inheritance one can leave is not made of assets or gold, but of compassion, courage, and the determination to protect the most vulnerable. Anna, The girl who dared to face a dragon not only saved her friend, but also catalyzed a father's transformation, teaching him that no business success, no fortune was worth more than his child's well-being.